Joining me now is John Ristau from Wellington. He's a seismologist at the Institute of Geological and Nuclear Sciences. Welcome to the programme. We've just been looking there at buildings that resist earthquakes and also retrofitting buildings. I want to speak about that in a moment with you, but first of all, it's been now over 200 hours since that first earthquake struck. What have you learned since that time?
Well, first, I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on air here. I realize that you're going through a great national tragedy at the moment. So what we've learned, there were, of course, what we know is that there were the two main earthquakes, the magnitude 7.8 earthquake that ruptured the East Anatolian Fault, and then there was a second magnitude 7.5 earthquake that occurred a few hours later, about 9 hours later, that was probably, now we figure, is on a what we call a splay fault, or a fault coming off of the North Anatolian Fault. And so far there's been, with these two earthquakes, there have been a number of large aftershocks. We've had at least three magnitude 6 size aftershocks, the largest being 6.7, and there's been at least 200 aftershocks that have had a magnitude of 4 larger, and I'm sure that people in the region have been feeling aftershocks constantly ever since these earthquakes started.
Indeed, and my colleague was in Malatya, one of the regions, and he just spoke about one that was at 4.6, and of course, he gave an anecdote. A man that didn't want to go back to his home that is on the 8th floor of a building. So just keep talking to us about those aftershocks. How common are they? Could we see another one on that scale, well, earthquake that measures over 7?
So we can't predict earthquakes, but we can do what we call aftershock forecasting, which is using probabilities and earthquake statistics to gauge the likelihood of more earthquakes, what the largest next, for earthquakes of a particular magnitude that are going to happen and how many of them. And one of the things that the earthquake statistics and probabilities tell us is that the most likely time to have a large earthquake is immediately after you've just had a large earthquake.
Okay.
So you see that with the magnitude 7.8 and the 7.5. Now, that's the more likely scenario is that you have a large earthquake and a bunch of smaller aftershocks. So in this case, unfortunately, you had a large earthquake and another very large one. Whether you want to call it a very large aftershock or a second earthquake, that would still be kind of debatable. But the most likely scenario that you're going to have from this point is that there will still be continuing aftershocks that are going to happen for months.
For months?
Probably.
You say?
Wow. Yes, for months, probably for even years.
In that same region, John, sorry to interrupt, in that very same region, which spans such a huge area, we've been saying it, from Washington to New York, just to give one example, from London to Paris, in that same area, we can still see aftershocks for a month and longer.
We're talking months, quite possibly even for years going on, that there will be heightened seismic activity.
So just again, sorry to interrupt again, where are people safe then? Where are people safe? Because you can imagine people are now in tents, in containers. There's talk about rehousing people. Where are people safe?
Well, they're going to be safe. The best thing to do, of course, is listen to the local authorities and ask and get information from them as to the safest places to be. What would not be safe is any buildings that have already been damaged, especially any significant damage from earthquakes already, because even moderate-sized aftershocks could actually do even more damage to them. So yeah, it's hard for me to say without actually being there where people would be the safest. However, one thing that people can maybe take some comfort in is that even though these aftershocks will unfortunately go on for a long time, they will. The most likely scenario is that they will decrease in the size of the aftershocks and the frequency of them. So early on, you're going to get a lot of magnitude 4 and 5 aftershocks, but these will, the numbers of these will go down over time, and it could be that 6 months from now, suddenly a 5.5 will happen that hasn't happened for a while and catch people off guard. But then, that might not happen again for a year or even longer, or may never happen again. So that is the unfortunate reality when you have a large earthquake like this, is that there will be aftershocks and they will go on for a long time. Mm-hmm. So people do need to be prepared for that. And, if you can gather some kind of earthquake kit, some sort of supplies together to be ready for it, that would be ideal.
And what about regions that are not on the Africa or Anatolian or fault line? What about where we're broadcasting from, this part of Türkiye? And of course, we're speaking from the most populous city in Türkiye, which of course in the 1999 suffered from the Izmit earthquake. 1,000 people died here, 30,000 in total from that earthquake.
Yes. So the most, probably the most well-known, especially like worldwide well-known fault in Turkey is the North Anatolian fault, which would be where where they had a number of major earthquakes in the 20th century, including the 1999 Izmit earthquake that you're talking about. So it's I guess. Unfortunately, Turkey, kind of like where we live here in New Zealand, is a country that's riddled with faults, with active faults, and earthquakes can strike along these faults at any time. So it's always one thing that we, of course, try to stress in New Zealand, and I'm sure in Türkiye that you're doing the same thing, is for people to always be prepared. To always have to know what to do when there's an earthquake. When an earthquake happens, if you feel strong shaking, drop, cover, and hold. Listen to what the local authorities are telling you to do. Make sure try and do your best to make sure you have earthquake supplies, food, water, shelter, some temporary shelter, ways that you can contact people, hopefully, in the event of an earthquake. And that's always, a lot of the best advice that you can give when you live in an earthquake-prone country.
I'm writing your tips down because so many people I speak to are also just so worried about it hitting again and hitting where we are in different parts of the country. Thank you so much for speaking to us today. We really appreciate your expertise and also your time. Thank you so much for that. That was John Ristau, a seismologist, speaking to us from Wellington in New Zealand.